In today's podcast, I want to share a really important lesson that you have taught me. Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. I enjoy jigsaw puzzles. It's one of the things my family does over the holidays, but sitting down and taking over an entire puzzle myself is a blast. You see, I see strategy in everything, and there's strategy to putting a puzzle together, and it varies with the type of puzzle, right? The shapes of the pieces affect it, the shape and size of the puzzle affect it, the image itself affects how you approach that particular puzzle building. And of course, I love it when the dots start to connect and we start to see the whole picture, which is totally a metaphor for business consulting, right? So that leads me in today's topic. In December 2023, a consulting puzzle came together for me in a very valuable way, and I want to share it with you. The Intentional Success Club, that's my peer group that we started the peer groups back at the beginning of the pandemic. They've evolved. They've got better. We've really enhanced the program for the coming year. We did an end of the year financial review exercise. I sent out a form for everybody to fill out to roll up their financial data for some comparison. And here's the thing, data doesn't tell the whole story, right? The questions that the data generate is equally important, if not more important. So the format was simple: trailing 12-month revenue, cost of goods sold, overhead for each member's live event production line of business. In other words, we separated out any secondary or tertiary lines of business that were more than 5% of revenue, so we didn't muddy up the numbers. We wanted to look at the core business together. And the boring expense stuff like utilities and office supplies were all rolled up together. But we did look at things like rent and, of course, marketing and sales, management, administration cost, and finance expense. So here's what we learned together as a group. Number one, how you classify data affects how you feel about it. Plus, how you feel about the data affects how you classify it. For example, when we put numbers below the line into the expenses, into the overhead area, we start to feel like we can't affect those numbers. And so instead, we focus on cost of goods sold and revenue, which are also important, but we tend to neglect the things that we've relegated to overhead. Another example is that if you believe that your internal processes are good and that you have the right team to follow those processes, then you tend to lump a lot of labor costs into one bucket. Now, that variable can be ignored because you feel it isn't significant enough to do anything granular with. So it tends to get ignored. And again, it becomes something that you can't change. It just is. So how you feel about data affects what you do with it and vice versa. Now, the second thing we learned was that profit matters a whole lot more when someone from the outside your company is looking at it. I thought profit was the most important thing in the world to everyone, but it's not. Many people just think it's just what happens. It's the result at the end of the year, not something that you control over. However, in this call, one of the owners was unconcerned that he had lower profit in 2023 until someone pointed out that he had double dipped his depreciation. He had carried over the previous year's depreciation. And by correcting that one number, he increased his profit by 50% to the bottom line in this recording. His profit wasn't important enough to him before that to find the mistake. But once the mistake was found, all of a sudden profit was way more important to him as it was to everyone else in the group. The third thing we learned is that when you see the relationship between product to service ratios and rental income to labor income, to put it in production rental terms, when you see the relationship between those things and how companies with higher service numbers did so much better, then we had a lot of great discussion opportunities. So simply by charging more, capturing more, putting higher margins on services, on talent, how that made such a huge impact on the bottom line. Great discussion. So if profit is a priority, then the things that are holding you back become less important. So this, can't charge for labor, we can't charge our clients won't pay that. Suddenly those arguments went away when we saw what the results were when you made that step and committed to that change. And then the fourth thing that we all learned together was that every group member has built-in subsidies in their business. It's impossible in owner-operated businesses to not have some sort of subsidies that are built in. For example, when the owner can contribute in terms of skills and expertise and client relationships to sales, that can have a huge impact on the business because they're probably replacing 2 or 3 people by being so good at sales, representing their company, capturing high value. Likewise, owners that push too much away from themselves can also see it in their results. So, what are the subsidies that we are putting into our business, and what could we do to reduce them or rely less on them, and will that help? Or is the subsidy your superpower? It was, great discussions. Look, whenever we open up ourselves to mutually shared insights, okay, the learning is amplified. The lesson here, the lesson for all of the club members was we each have to find our own balance point, and we can better see the variables in our own business by observing those in other people's businesses and figuring out how we can apply them to ourselves. Now, interesting thing is, we didn't linger on gross profit or cost of goods sold percentages, which is one of the most frequently asked questions I get from the wild. When people ask me questions from the wild on webinars, whatever, what's the average gross profit in the industry? Club members knew that everyone keep their numbers differently. No one expected those figures to match. Nobody called out the fact that one of the members had 60% gross profit and the other member had 35% gross profit. This is a level of sophistication I'm very proud of because they were able to drill down into the things that truly mattered, right? Now, I said this podcast was all about what I learned, and I learned some great stuff. Sometimes I don't know what I know because I do this so often. I'm so close to my business. But another benefit of working with a club, with a group of peers, is that I have the opportunity to apply my knowledge to multiple companies at the same time, which helps me recognize patterns. So when I look at a company and I make my subjective assessment of that firm's health and viability, which is something I am asked to do all the time, it just comes to me, right? But in this particular call, I was able to, as we were talking, document the 5 primary data points that I use when I'm making a subjective assessment. Now, there are objective assessments we can make as well, but there's a mix of subjective and objective things together that make up that whole review. So I've never codified my approach to this, and it's evolved over the years, which is one reason I never write it down. But now it seems to have settled in, and this looks like a very solid way of looking at it. So as I looked at the entire club's individual results side by side, I could easily explain the traits of each company that created the differences. For instance, one owner said, "Hey, you did everything right. Why didn't you make more money?" Awesome challenge, great peer challenge. That's a great question to ask. Another one asked, if these 2 companies have the same headcounts, why are their results so different? Right? These are insightful questions and they deserve answers. They're great questions because numbers don't tell the whole story. What are the subjective measurements that we need to consider? So, here is my list of the quantitative and qualitative assessment criteria that I find that I innately use when I review an organization Generally, it begins with our first meeting and our first conversation, but I continue to accumulate data over time. Number one, and this is an order I think of what is the most useful apparent thing, and it's going to seem counterintuitive to start with pain. How hard is it for this company to do a good job? Is successful execution easy or is it a slog? Right? The thing is, many companies are happy with their quality. Very rarely do people come to me and say, our output is horrible. Nobody says we do horrible shows. Would you help me fix it? Right? But they do come and say, it is really difficult to do a show well. We always pull it off in the end. So many companies are happy with their quality, but they don't realize how difficult it is to get things done. There's an underlying assumption that maybe this is supposed to be hard, therefore the pain of execution is normal. Often group members will ask each other, do you guys have this problem? Is this as hard for you? Sometimes the process seems painless because you and your team are numb. You've put up with the pain so long you don't feel it anymore. So by starting with pain, we get a very good barometer of how the other assessment criteria are going to play out. Now, the second criteria is confidence. How sure are you that things will work out, right? Most people feel like it's going to turn out okay, right? But sometimes it's a pain tells me a lot more about the company. If I know it's a pain, but I'm confident it's going to work out, that paints a picture. Now, low confidence and high pain is a crisis. I'm not confident that it's going to work out. And man, this is a pain in the butt. Holy crap, we don't need to look at everything else. We've got to get to work, right? But typically, I'm going to find high pain coupled with high confidence. The next thing I look at is quantitative. I look at those product to service ratios. How much of the event production income is from equipment rental compared to fees for talent and experience, right? Companies that undervalue labor or underspec labor tend to overstaff their business, and they create processes to justify the headcount of that large staff. So they become process-driven, labor-intensive organizations because they're trying to make the numbers work. The other aspect of this is that this is value proposition, and value propositions are subjective, but the first sale of a value proposition is to yourself. And if you don't believe in what you do and how valuable your service is, who will? So this is another indication that we may be not confident enough about what we are worth, and we're selling from a position of fear. Now, collecting more data, the fourth thing I look at is headcount. How large is the full-time team compared to the amount of revenue? And there was a time where I can give you ideal numbers, which make no sense anymore now that we're looking at scalable organizations and scalability as a solution. Lower overhead, more outsourcing, better balance. So the right headcount is not the right number. Do you have the right headcount for this business model is the right question. So does this business conflate direct and indirect tasks, and does that affect the official headcount? Does the headcount reflect a good use of resources, right? Now, understaffing is a thing too. We don't just see overstaffing. Half the companies I look at are understaffed. They need to add talent. They're too dependent on a couple of individuals exercising superpowers, or they're creating bottlenecks and dead ends that are keeping them from moving forward. Again, it's all about balance. And then the last thing I look at, and I look at this last because it always needs to be qualified, and that is profit. Profit is a meaningless number if we don't understand how we got there. So a company can generate huge profit while burning out its team and losing repeat business. That's not a good thing, right? Reinvestment can hide profit. I mean, it helps to level the report data. And the reason I asked the team to submit a report in my template is that we want to isolate finance decisions so that we can make easier comparisons between the companies. So we can, as most of the businesses I deal with are owner S corp businesses, which means the taxes pass through the individual owners or shareholders, which means they make profit decisions based on their individual tax situation. So we've got to remove those financing decisions from the profit equation so that we can see a clearer picture of how well the business is actually operating. So we look at the pain, we look at the confidence, we look at the service ratios, we evaluate the headcount and headcount efficiency, and we compare it to the profit. Are we getting the results that we thought we should be getting? So talking about these things in a group setting is transformative, right? Owners that I have been coaching I've been coaching them for years, could suddenly understand their needs better because of the added insights of the peer group, right? The club helped them see the things that I've been explaining to them in a different context, just like I help their employees understand things that they tell them and vice versa, right? So it was a great experience. I'm so happy to start my year out with this new insight into what I know and how I can better use it. And while this is clearly a plug for my Intentional Success Club, which you should look into, I've got 2 new groups forming here at the beginning of 2024. I also want to encourage you to take stock in your results and figure out how well you've done and how you got there and what you could do better. And as you know, I'm always here and I'm happy to help. Thanks for listening. If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimpson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.